It lays the predicate and the foundation for the development of a weather satellite that will permit man to determine the world's cloud layer and ultimately to control the weather, and he who controls the weather will control the world.
Question: how many have any idea of how far past the breaking point we already are on countless fronts, societally and ecologically, and how desperate power structures are to maintain their control of populations till the final hour? There are now over a dozen and a half U.S. states pushing forward with legislation bills to ban geoengineering. I'll get to the list of states shortly. First, chemically engineered winter, specifically patented processes of chemical ice nucleation, cloud seeding operations, and the freakish fogs that increasingly come with these operations. First, this headline from the UK Daily Mail, quote, "Mystery as thick fog sweeps the U.S. with chemical-like smells and particles in the air." Let's keep going. Dense fog warning issued for 12 states as drivers told to slow down. That's from Newsweek. And this, dense fog could snarl morning commute. That's NBC Chicago. From Florida Local 10 News, South Florida ends 2024 on a hot and humid note after foggy start. In headline. From Forbes.com, Southern storms, thick fog affecting holiday travel. From the report, areas of the U.S. are facing storms and thick fog that could affect travel, particularly in the Northwest, South, and Midwest. That's a pretty big spread, as millions of Americans travel for the holidays. Dense fog advisories are in place across the U.S., the report states, that could reduce drivers' visibility, including parts of Texas, Wisconsin, Iowa, Maryland, Virginia, West Virginia, Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, North Dakota, Florida, and Minnesota. There's more. From NBC News, dense fog advisory issued for parts of the Chicago area with big temperature drop coming. The takeaway here is the big temperature drops that are coming with the fog. The climate engineers are ever more desperate to create sensationalized headlines of winter weather. Major cool-down operations are underway for some of the most populated regions of the U.S., specifically the eastern half. Patented processes of chemical ice nucleation cloud seeding creates a cold, dense layer of air that descends to the surface. As global temperatures, surface temperatures, continue to rise overall, chemical ice nucleation cloud seeding will spawn more fog scenarios. The Chinese have long since been conducting such operations. Are we to believe that the U.S. military isn't doing exactly the same thing, a military that's much bigger and much more capable? Historical record proves this is true. We have it on the record going back 3/4 of a century and more, patents going back even further. Not opinion, not speculation, not hypothesis, historical record. From the National Weather Service, a cold layer at the surface can cause fog because when the air near the ground cools sufficiently and reaches its dew point, the moisture in the air condenses into tiny water droplets, forming fog. For the record, chemically nucleated precipitation is increasingly reaching the surface before freezing. More from the National Weather Service. A freezing fog advisory is issued by your local National Weather Service office when fog develops and surface temperatures are at or below freezing. Here's another point for the record. The chemical ice nucleated precipitation is the core component of the ever-increasing surface flash freezes. The coming eastern U.S. engineered cool-down will be fed, yet again, with a moisture flow straight from the record-warm Gulf of Mexico. A transition zone of ice storms will be the boundary between the warm moisture flow and the so-called winter weather regions, where some form of frozen precipitation will fall, various shapes and compositions, and populations are increasingly noticing there's something very wrong with what's falling from their skies. The longer the chemical ice nucleation cloud seeding operations continue, the colder it will get on the surface, though these operations do dry up much of the available atmospheric moisture in the process. Again, in the transition zones between far above freezing flows of atmospheric moisture and the engineered winter weather zones, there are ice storms where the chemically nucleated precipitation hits the ground before freezing solid. On that note, from Yahoo News, winter weather advisory calls for freezing rain. Extreme hail also a core component of chemical ice nucleation operations, and we're seeing that everywhere. Search Lake Michigan ice balls for a look at that. Search the engineering winter section on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org, and you will see shocking images and find shocking data of how widespread these engineered winter operations are. Question: are extreme chemical ice nucleation cloud seeding cool down operations unique to January of this year? Short answer, no. And again, there is the fog factor. Rewind to this Washington Post headline from January of last year. Quote, why thick fog is blanketing a record stretch of the U.S., record until this year. Dense fog advisories affected nearly a third of the U.S. population in 27 states. Imagine that. Yes. Welcome to chemically engineered winter weather. And very rapid uniform drizzle, by the way, is a harbinger of heavy climate engineering aerosol seeding operations being conducted in the skies above the storm moisture. This is very easy to see on puddles. If you see a very rapid uniform drizzle, that's indicative of the droplet size being dictated by the condensation nuclei, a seeded particle. And we have tested that type of fallout from the storms and found what we knew we would find: climate engineering elements. For context, this rewind to a 2020 report from BusinessInsider.com. China is massively expanding its weather modification program, saying it will be able to cover half the country in artificial rain and snow by 2025. Well, there you have it. It seems we're there, and not just China. Even further back, this ABC report from 2009. Artificial snowstorms bring chaos to Beijing. Chinese scientists have artificially induced the second major snowstorm to wreak havoc on Beijing this season, state media said, reigniting the debate over the practice of tinkering with Mother Nature. Yes, man's war against nature is, of course, ultimately a war against himself. Anyone who thinks that the Chinese government can do things on this scale and ours can't, or won't, or wouldn't, time to wake up. Currently, in the U.S., the following headlines, which are exactly the kind the climate engineers and the controllers want to sensationalize, just in time to try and eclipse and overshadow the headlines of planetary meltdown that have just been published as of the first of the year. I'll get to that. But first, sensationalized winter weather headlines from the script-reading climate engineering cover-up actors at AccuWeather. Multiple Arctic outbreaks to affect more than 250 million in central and eastern U.S. into mid-January. AccuWeather continues. The central, southern, and eastern United States are bracing for the coldest, most persistent, frigid Arctic air in years. That will come, they say, in waves and last through mid-January. Storms packing snow and ice will join in. They then say there will be at least 3 major blasts of Arctic air. The first outbreak will be from January 3rd to 4th, the second on January 7th to 8th, and then the third on January 11th to 12th. Additional rounds of Arctic air may follow. Let's stop there. Isn't it interesting that though the so-called weather forecasters, aka the script readers, and I mean that literally, by the way, for those who are not familiar with this issue, private defense contractors Raytheon and Lockheed Martin do all the weather modeling, and by the way, those two private defense contractors are neck deep in climate engineering patents and operations, and they do all the weather modeling for the National Weather Service and NOAA, and that modeling, or the script, is passed down all the way to the local meteorologist who willingly reads that script to protect his paycheck and pension. Whole system ultimately controlled by those who control the funds. Same with the conflict and carnage zones around the world. Same core of control. Keep that in mind. So the script readers now commonly can't get the weather forecast right an hour ahead of time, but the AccuWeather climate engineering cover-up crew gives us specific details of what's coming on specific dates, stretching out for nearly 2 weeks. Also from AccuWeather, colossal winter storm to unleash snow and ice, severe weather from the plains to the mid-Atlantic. Again, exactly the kind of headline the climate engineers and the controllers want. There's more. From the New York Post, polar vortex headed for U.S. will bring exceptionally cold temperatures in the new year. Weather models are, quote, screaming. Sensationalization. That's what this is. Here's another from AccuWeather. Dramatically colder, snowier days ahead for first half of January. January 2025 will bring a broad, cold winter weather pattern to the United States and Canada after a dynamic end of 2024. First, part of this moisture flow, or the moisture flows that are being used to cool certain regions down, this has just come over the Pacific Northwest with very warm temperatures. In fact, snow levels far into the mountains, I think 8,000 or 9,000 feet up. And they're not chemically nucleating this particular batch of moisture because they don't want to dry it up too fast. They need it to migrate further to the east where they have bigger plans for it. It is so incredibly obvious on the water vapor loops. And when you watch the clowns and climate engineering cover-up actors at AccuWeather, Weather Nation, Weather Channel, they look increasingly uncomfortable, and so they should be, because they should ask themselves how the public is going to respond to them once the public wakes up to the fact that they've participated in the crimes of covering climate engineering up. What will the public do at that point? Will they hold such individuals legally and morally accountable for their part in the crimes of climate engineering cover-up? We'll see soon enough. And again, what was the dynamic end to 2024, which has already been officially declared the hottest year ever recorded globally by far. And this is on top of the previous 9 years, all being record hot years globally. And all of this in spite of the data skewing chemical cooldowns that are used in part to mask the totality of climate collapse that's unfolding by the day. Global weather warfare is further fueling the fire on top of countless other sources of human activity, which has caused immense and irreparable damage to this planet. And if you don't think things are this bad, you will soon. Wait and see. This is Dane Wigington. You're listening to the weekly installment of the commercial-free, non-political Global Alert News Report, The End of the World as We Know It broadcast, brought to you by Geoengineeringwatch.org, the largest and most visited website in the world on the subject of global climate engineering operations, aka weather warfare. As I state every single week and will continue to, reaching a critical mass of awareness is the only way forward in this fight. Only when those that are actively or passively participating realize that they are going down on the same ship and they are helping to sink that ship do we have any chance of changing course. We can and must reach a critical mass of awareness, start a conversation on climate engineering that leads people to a credible source of data. Credibility is key. Geoengineeringwatch.org will continue all of our efforts to be the go-to source on covert climate engineering operations. A conversation on climate engineering can easily be started with Geoengineering Watch awareness-raising materials available on our homepage, printed materials, and shirts and hoodies. All exceptionally effective conversation starters, and that's the first foot in the door in regard to waking people up to what's happening in our skies. I'll get back to the climate engineering assault in a moment, but first, some random but important to hear headlines. First from MSN. Warning as volcano off the west coast is, quote, primed to erupt in 2025. This report said it's going to happen in the next 2 weeks. We'll see. But exactly how would they know that? Tectonic weaponry is real. Seafloor nuclear detonations are real. Who knows what they are prepared to do at this late hour, as they know they can't maintain the current paradigm much longer. From ScienceAlert.com, volcanic activity beneath Yellowstone's massive caldera could be on the move. Again, tectonic weaponry, frequency transmissions, the capabilities of these environmental modification weapons is staggering. Please research. Please don't assume that this is all impossible. If you went back 100 years and told people you could talk on a little black box with no wires to anybody, anywhere in the world, anytime you want, they would lock you up. Please examine the lens through which you see the world. Base your opinions on data, not ideology, programming, or preconceptions. Also from ScienceAlert.com, NASA is watching a vast growing anomaly in the Earth's magnetic field. We don't know what's affecting what at this point. 2,400 nuclear detonations, many of them in the atmosphere, some in the magnetosphere, and the reverberations of that are still ongoing. Again, none of this can truly be considered natural at this point, can it? Given the totality of damage the human race has inflicted on the planet, with the single largest factor so far, single most destructive, climate intervention operations, climate disruption operations is what they should be called, and short of nuclear cataclysm, which is now likely also coming soon, it's the single greatest and most immediate threat we face at this moment. The toxicity from these operations, the destruction to the ozone layer, the disruption of the hydrological cycle, I could go on and on. Bottom line, this is the single greatest derailment of the planet's life support systems yet by the human race. But we still have, again, 442 nuclear power plants likely coming for meltdown, nuclear warfare exchanges, circles in Washington openly discussing what they see as a benefit of a limited nuclear exchange to put enough particulate matter in the air to slow down the warming of the planet. That's the end of the road. If that happens, any nuclear exchange, end of the road. Ionizing radiation will strip away what's left of the ozone layer. Game over. One more from Science Alert. Northern lights could ring in New Year following massive solar eruptions. Again, this reminder, before the last large aurora borealis event, May of last year, about 10 days beforehand, the HAARP facility in Alaska, ionosphere heater, which is a weapon of mass destruction, warned the FAA to keep air traffic out of its airspace during that event. Why would they do that unless this ionosphere heater weapon of mass destruction had a part in that massive aurora borealis? They're using the atmosphere for a battleground and a physics lab, and that's not going to continue much longer without all of us paying the price. About grid power, yes, it's all going down soon. And in spite of what the Weather Channel clowns tell you that a Generac home generator will save you from a dying planet, that is not the case. Latest example of coming grid failures from AP News. Nearly all of Puerto Rico was without power on New Year's Eve. 90% of almost 1.5 million across Puerto Rico. No power. Same thing's happening in Africa, South America. It's coming here. Wait and see. Here's an important update on insects, or should I say the lack of them. And for the record, geoengineeringwatch.org was the first major source to publish in 2012 that insect populations around the world were collapsing. The so-called climate science community and science community as a whole tried to marginalize us and deny that data, which we gained by working with former government scientists, by the way. And now they're having to admit it because they can no longer hide it. The gravity of this cannot be overstated. From Medium.com, why the insect apocalypse spells the end of everyday life as we know it. The report says, beyond the missing butterflies, insects are key to all life on Earth. For decades, researchers have documented a, quote, terrifying decline in insect populations worldwide, and recent findings suggest the problem is even worse than we thought. How many times on how many dire issues have we had the science community now say, oh, it's way worse than we thought, which is exactly what I've stated at geoengineeringwatch.org for a decade and a half. As bad as headlines sound, reality is worse, and now they're admitting to it. How much of insect populations declined? 80 to 90% globally, terrestrial and aquatic. Insects die, we die, period. Think about that. From ScienceAlert.com, plastic found inside more than 50% of plaques from clogged arteries. Plastics are now everywhere, the report says, with tiny fragments found in major organs. It's all major organs of the human body, including the placenta and brain. Been over this week after week. Again, this reminder, polymer nanoparticles, part of climate engineering operations. That's why they're found everywhere in the globe. This is in addition to decomposing plastics, which of course we know are there as well. But when the particles found look manufactured and are uniform, think climate engineering. From severe weather, Europe. January 2025 weather. The Polar Express arrives with unusual cold for the whole month over the United States. Again, another sensationalized headline. They say the temperature patterns directly correspond to the movement of the pressure systems. The jet stream for what's coming in the U.S. was completely bizarre, diving straight north to south over a western part of the U.S., making a massive loop, clear down over the southern tip of Florida before hooking right back up, heading to the northwest, which is wrong, and back up to the north. They are shockingly effective at manipulating the upper level wind currents with ionosphere heater installations that can manipulate atmospheric pressure zones. As I move on, again, there's more random headlines, but they're important to hear for an understanding of the wider horizon. And so in regard to pressure, let's think of financial pressure in this case for a moment. As things implode, again, without a functional environment, there is no economy. The environment has historically provided 75% of all global GDP for free, no more. All of this is inseparable. Credit card debt hits a record 1.17 trillion. That's from CNBC. Can't afford it? No problem. Just charge it. It's the American way. And for the record, I'm not pointing a finger on those that are having to use credit simply to survive. I'm referring to those that are acquiring much more than they can afford and don't need. And that endless consumption through the holidays we just came through, that's what that whole scenario was built around. That's part of what's sinking the ship. The notion that we can endlessly consume on a finite planet with finite resources, not going to happen. And it will end poorly if we remain in the current course. So putting puzzle pieces together, imploding environment, too many mouths to feed, populations neck deep in manufactured debt. Will the controllers do all they can to cull populations at this point? Have they been at it for a very long time already? Are they now conditioning populations for yet another round of the same? From the UK Independent, more than 70% of California's dairy cow herds are now infected with bird flu. Question, what are the hundreds of biolabs all over the world up to? That blank's not hard to fill in. This report continues, again from the UK Independent. They also say nearly 70 people have been infected with the bird flu as infections continue to emerge around the country. They continue. Last week, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention said that the virus had likely mutated in a Louisiana patient. Experts worry that the bird flu will eventually mutate into a lethal strain capable of human-to-human transition. Sounds like a lead-up to the Wuhan market scenario again, doesn't it? The longer this virus circulates, they say, unchecked, the higher the likelihood it will acquire the mutations needed to cause a pandemic. We need to act urgently to prevent this scenario and to avert a potential pandemic. And of course, what do you think they're referring to? Time to roll up your sleeve again. From MSN, multiple states bring back mask rules as doctor warn of a quad-demic. It just keeps going, doesn't it? Bottom line, food and the lack of it, which is coming, fueling all of the other factors and the controller motivations to do what they do. From ABC News, soil degradation threatens food supply and scientists are calling for action. They say soil degradation occurs when human activity affects physical, chemical, and biological health of the soils. They say if we don't try to fix it, the planet will cease to function and humanity will be in trouble. In trouble? No, we'll be gone. No food, no people, simple. From Bloomberg, the world is quietly losing the land it needs to feed itself. Land degradation, they say, same thing, is a growing problem for not just climate change, but food and water security. Why isn't it getting more attention? Question mark. Here's a question. Why can't the vast majority of the population admit to what they can see happening in the skies with their own eyes? That is truly perplexing at this point, isn't it? When's the last time you saw a truly blue sky? From theatlantic.com, get ready for higher food prices. And then they say Trump vowed to lower food prices. His policies will almost certainly do the exact opposite. Just a big theater going on right now, and political everything is all a part of that theater. I don't care what stripe they wear. The last elected official to draw a line in the sand was John F. Kennedy, and he lived about a week. Think about that. From the New York Times, the 100-year extinction panic is back, they say, right on schedule. This is truly moronic, as if comparing what someone said 100 years ago about potential human extinction is relevant to what is actually happening today. We are neck deep in the sixth great mass extinction. We're losing species at the statistical rate of about 15,000 times the background rate. That is truly apocalyptic, and on the current trajectory, we are not going to be here much long, and that's not theory, conjecture, or hypothesis. It's a mathematical certainty, and not long doesn't mean centuries. It doesn't mean decades, much less. It's a nonlinear equation that must be understood, nonlinear, and few understand that equation. That needs to change. As we enter 2025, how many have any clue that we're, again, neck deep in the sixth great mass extinction, which is unfolding far faster than any previous mass extinction, which makes it exponentially worse? And even now, how many continue to push the total delusion that we just need even more technology to save us from ourselves? How's that going so far? Use climate engineering and nuclear everything as the most stunning examples of the tech insanity. The following is a quote from Kurt Vonnegut that is very apropos. He said, "We'll go down in history as the first society that wouldn't save itself because it wasn't cost effective." Think about that. Industrialized, militarized, so-called society was only temporarily possible by the absurdly unsustainable overexploitation of finite resources on a finite planet, which has in turn contaminated virtually everything and now triggered the cascading collapse of the planet's primary life support systems. No functional environment, no people. One more sensationalized report on the coming engineered cooldowns, then we'll get to the bigger picture. From Axios.com, polar vortex poised to spin into U.S., leading to frigid January. Areas of the U.S., including the South and Southeast, likely to see frigid air that could break records by mid-month, along with potentially blockbuster winter storms. Threat level, they say pieces of the polar vortex are projected to swirl southward. That's that manipulated jet stream I talked about, out of northern Canada into parts of the U.S. during early and mid-January. Accompanying the cold will be the threat of multiple significant winter storms. They go on and on. Risk to power outages, etc. But what does the wider horizon reveal? When we look past climate engineering, chemical ice nucleation, cloud seeding, surface flash freeze, chemical cooldowns, not good. Here's reality. As of the first of this year, from numerous sources, the UK Guardian is one, world endures decade of deadly heat as 2024 caps hottest years on record, 10 of them in a row, by the way. The report says the world has endured a decade of deadly heat, with 2024 capping 10 years of unprecedented temperatures. And for those who think that governments around the world wouldn't and aren't neck deep in climate engineering and chemical ice nucleation so they can try to keep business as usual until the moment of impact, think again, look up, please look up, put down the electrical device and clear the lens through which you see the world. Of course they are climate engineering. Of course they are chemically nucleating cloud moisture. That's what these winter weather whiplash flash freezes are from. It doesn't go from 85 degrees to single digits in a day, less than 24 hours, without a whole lot of chemical help. And that's what's happened in Denver for about 3 of the last 5 years. They use Denver because it sits in a basin. That cold, dense air settles to the surface. Fog, again, in places. And they're using specific locations, the lake effect snow, they're using again and again and again, showing pictures of very localized areas where they pile up 4 or 5 feet of snow and try to paint the picture that we're all living in a winter wonderland, which couldn't be further from the truth. It's a chemical ice nucleated nightmare. From MSN, 2024, hottest year in history and its devastating impact. Ecosystems are imploding around the globe. 2024 has officially become the hottest year in recorded history, surpassing critical climate thresholds. We have blown past the barriers. We're through the guardrail. And for those still clinging to the notion that the planet's somehow cooling or entering an ice age, I have no idea what reality people that cling to that are in. No idea. It's not this reality. It's not real. Of course, none of us like Al Gore. The environmental groups are the epitome of hypocrisy, but that does not change reality. Because those groups won't face climate engineering, we can't ignore other parts in this equation. It's a this and that equation, not a this or that. All forms of human activity that have affected the energy balance of the planet are part of the problem. All forms, including climate engineering, at the top of the list. And that's what the so-called environmental community won't look at, which is unimaginably hypocritical. From Axios.com, 2024 was alarmingly hot all over the world. 2024, the second straight hottest year on record. But they say it wasn't supposed to be as hot as it was, coming in far ahead of 2023's alarming global temperature spike. Every new report, way worse than we thought. Gee, we didn't know. We knew at geoengineeringwatch.org. I knew. How could they not have known? Threat level, they say, for reasons climate scientists don't yet fully understand, 2024 is even likely to temporarily eclipse the Paris Agreement's 1.5 temperature target. What a joke that is. Unfiltered frontline temperature data indicates we're past 3.5 C, not 1.5. The unsettling possibility, the report says, in play is that climate change is accelerating, which implies that tipping points such as the shutdown of major ocean currents are closer than we once thought. Everything worse than we thought, closer than we thought. And about the ocean currents, they're referring to the AMOC current here. And for those who think that implies some kind of day after tomorrow Hollywood scenario, that's not the case. You don't lose the heat. If some areas in the northern latitude, like Western Europe, temporarily cool slightly, other areas get to keep that warmth and they superheat. The heat continues to build. It's not going away, and an ocean current shutdown doesn't stop that buildup. It simply shuts down the distribution of that heat. That's all. Heat's not going anywhere. It continues to build up under a canopy of toxic climate engineering particles and gases that are building up in the atmosphere, including not just CO2, but methane, nitrous oxide, and water vapor as well. And about the water vapor, that would help cool the planet if the climate engineers weren't diminishing natural cloud cover. The planet's trying to cool itself. It can't. It's trying to respond to the damage already done from other forms of human activity. It can't, because climate engineering is a straitjacket that is preventing the planet from responding. And if we don't remove that straitjacket soon, game over. Moving on from the Columbia Climate School, how climate change impacts renewable energy. Let's talk about how climate engineering impacts renewable energy. It completely derails all three primary forms of alternative energy, and it's not renewable, so I'm not going to call it renewable. Better than outright burning of carbon fuel, but not renewable. So climate engineering blocks direct sunlight. That is radically diminishing solar PV output. It is affecting convection, which in turn affects wind power, making all or nothing wind scenarios, which completely diminishes wind power anything. Not that wind power is viable to begin with, but if the wind speed doubles, the turbine makes, from an optimal speed, the turbine makes nothing because you have to shut it down so it won't blow apart. Cut the wind speed in half from optimal, and the turbine makes 1/8 of its design output. And that's exactly what's happening. And about hydropower, when you diminish the hydrological cycle in key areas, and they're so droughted out that their hydro production is completely shut down, that takes care of that, doesn't it? All most affected by climate engineering over anything else, and no one will admit that. None of the power structure funded institutions will admit the truth. More on the ongoing tech fix delusions and deceptions as weather warfare rages on in our skies. From the Harvard Political Review, exiting the Holocene, can geoengineering give humanity a lifeline to fix the climate crisis? Question mark. How incredibly moronic is this? After over 75 years of these operations, we're circling the drain, and Harvard is asking, could this save us? It's mind-numbing, absolutely mind-numbing. They say that these operations have the potential for serious harm. Solar geoengineering, they say, could interfere with our weather patterns. Could, may, might. It's completely decimated them. They say it could cause contaminated rain, deplete the ozone layer, which is now only 30% remaining, and cause more unknown side effects, like every breath we take full of toxic particles, for example. Here's the last two excerpts from this Harvard Political Review report. They say, the controversy with stratospheric aerosol injection lies in the fact the potential for good it brings is only matched by its potential for destruction. Stop. Reality check. We are already dealing with its potential for destruction. This is all out weather warfare, and about its potential good. Exactly what is that? It doesn't exist. There is nothing benevolent about climate engineering anything. It is weather warfare, period, and biological warfare because of the toxic elements being used. And again, two of these elements, polymer fibers and graphene, are used militarily as biological carrier platforms. That means to carry a pathogen from the clouds to the ground to infect the populations below. And the world's second most recognized climate engineer, Dr. Ken Caldera, stating that's what he did for the US DoD. Designed methods of spraying pathogens into clouds to infect the populations below. Why would we think this isn't ongoing already? We have a historical record of it ongoing. 239 acknowledged open-air biological tests by the U.S. military against innocent, unknowing U.S. populations as of 1977. How many have been conducted since? The last two sentences from this Harvard Political Review report, geoengineering consequences could be incredibly devastating, but they say geoengineering may become inevitable to prevent future climate-induced calamities. Geoengineering is a calamity and has been for over 75 years. From newscientist.com, fights over geoengineering experiments will heat up in 2025. That's the end of the headline. Yes, it's about time. For the record, fights over everything from food to water to breathable air and a way to survive are already unfolding in countless regions around the world. There is no place to hide. In the words of former U.S. President Lyndon Johnson 62 years ago, he who controls the weather controls the world. You're listening to the weekly installment of Global Alert News, the Bad News Broadcast, installment number 491, January 4th, 2025. This is Dane Wigington, your host. Global Alert News brought to you by Geoengineeringwatch.org, the largest and most visited website in the world on the subject of climate intervention operations known as geoengineering. Recordings of this broadcast, non-political, no commercials, can be found on the homepage of Geoengineeringwatch.org under the recent column and on the Dane Wigington YouTube channel. My deepest gratitude to those that are courageously marching forward in this fight. Only our collective efforts can still make a difference at this late hour. Please help us to share the groundbreaking documentary, The Dimming, which fully exposes the climate engineering atrocities. The best way to share is by circulating the direct link to The Dimming by email directly from the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org. Sharing directly helps us to overcome social media censorship, which is getting worse by the day and likely to get much worse soon. When viewing our YouTube of The Dimming or Global Alert News or any other Geoengineering Watch video on YouTube, please subscribe, share, and comment, all of which helps us to circulate critically important data to a much wider audience. About reaching those that still aren't looking up, they're still looking down. Here's one way: by starting a conversation with Geoengineering Watch awareness-raising materials. They can be found on our homepage. Our only goal, provide activists what they need to move this fight forward. Very high-quality printed materials, shocking images, pictures worth 1,000 words. We pass these printed materials on for less than our cost of producing and shipping. Please help us to sound the alarm. We have Geoengineering Watch hoodies, shirts, photos of both on our homepage. We have scannable business cards and bumper stickers, all effective tools to help strike up a conversation on the climate engineering issue. Again, reaching a critical mass. This is a must, and we are rapidly running out of time. If you're willing to share a picture of yourself with a Geoengineering Watch shirt or hoodie, ideally in a crowded location, please send your photo to us, and we'll put it up in our activist compilation page, which is part of our materials page. The images encourage others to make their voices heard in this all-important battle to sound the alarm. Again, to all those, each and every individual that's committed to exposing and halting the climate engineering insanity, my deepest gratitude to you, now and forever. Moving on, missed this one earlier from japanskiexperience.com. Yes, Japan is also neck deep in climate engineering operations, chemical ice nucleation specifically in this case. Here's the headline: 68-year-old snowfall record broken! Exclamation point. They say the early December 2024 snowfall in Japan hasn't seen a better start since 1956. Another exclamation point. Resorts have reported almost 6 meters of snow. 6 meters? Christmas is upon us and winter has a long way to go yet! Exclamation point. Let's set the record straight for the overall picture. Along with the world overall, China and Japan, hottest years on record. And the way they are masking this is with headlines exactly like this, and don't eat that snow, and I don't say that in jest. It is packed with chemicals. We know because we have tested again and again and again. That's climate engineering. From Colorado, the Coloradoan, .com. Crazy Colorado storm system expected to bring extreme avalanche danger and high fire danger. Wait, does that make any sense? Storms that bring extreme danger of avalanches and firestorms? Again, welcome to climate engineering. About the Southwest drying and dying. And no, it didn't go away. From the New York Post, shrinking Colorado River puts 100 million at risk as crucial water source could drastically impact nation's food supply. That water's toxic as well. Keep that in mind. Every drop of rain on planet Earth. Not my opinion. It's not a theory or conjecture. Peer-reviewed science study proven. And not just any chemicals, not just climate engineering fallout elements, highly toxic by themselves, even more toxic when you mix them together, but PFAS forever chemicals, every single drop of rain, everywhere. Keep that in mind. This report from the New York Post says the Imperial Valley in Southern California relies 100% on the Colorado River for its water. The valley received less than 3 inches of rain a year, yet produces about 2/3 of the country's winter produce. 2/3. Not for much longer. Farmers in the valley say the shrinking water levels and competing interest over river usage will badly impact the nation's food supply. Empty food shelves are coming. You can quote me on that. Drought deluge scenarios, the hallmark of climate engineering. More on drought and the ultimate control of populations. This headline: drought cuts Morocco's wheat production by half as water crisis deepens. That's from MoroccoWorldNews.com. They say drought-stricken Morocco's wheat production plunges to its lowest level, forcing the country to nearly double its Russian wheat imports within a year. Good luck with that, because Russia's wheat crop has also just crashed. These are called falling dominoes. It's a cascading collapse scenario, and it's accelerating by the day. It's not just going to go away for those that think if they just vote some political actor into office, everything is going to magically get better. Good luck with that. From ABC Australia, South Australian farmers count their losses after worst season in decades. It's worst season ever if you look at the overall picture, but they always try to make it sound like, well, it's happened before, so people think, well, it can't be that bad. This report says frost, drought, and late rain have been the hallmarks of one of the most challenging seasons for South Australian farmers in recent memory. We see that all over the globe. Late season, chemically nucleated cool down kills everything right after it blooms, or hail. This is weather warfare. Again, control the weather, control the food supplies, control the populations, control the world. More on grid shutdowns. Talked about this a little bit earlier, and the drought causing effects on hydropower. From the New York Times, rivers run dry and the lights go out. A warming nation's doom loop. From that report, an extraordinary drought has drained Ecuador's rivers and reservoirs, leading to power outages of up to 14 hours a day. How would people in LA or New York or San Francisco do with that? Think they would make it very long like that? They say some fear this is the beginning of a larger global crisis. You think? They continue. Just a decade ago, the small, resource-rich nation of Ecuador was embarking on a bold transition to hydroelectric power. It was one of the many South American countries betting that their abundant rivers harnessed by dams could satisfy growing energy needs. You can't continually grow anywhere. I don't care what the scenario is. This is a finite planet with finite resources with the clinically insane in control. How's that going to work out? Today, this report says those grand designs are colliding with the warming climate. They're also colliding with climate engineering that no one in any official source has the courage to admit to yet. Ecuador has been pummeled by an extraordinary drought exacerbated by global warming. Let's stop there again. The single biggest drought-causing factor, period. I'm not denying other sources of global warming. I just had someone send a very scathing comment to me that how could I possibly deny global warming from other sources? I never have, ever. I'm simply saying we can't have any legitimate discussion about climate, anything from any perspective, without addressing this first and foremost. And that's something that so many in the so-called environmentally concerned communities won't admit to. They won't engage in this. They won't admit to climate engineering because they've been trained and programmed to put their fingers in their ears and say, I can't hear you when you mention the word climate engineering. And that's truly unfortunate from people who claim to be educated, isn't it? I lost my place here, but bottom line is, from the report, South America, drying rivers and reservoirs, putting the country's power grid on the brink of total collapse. Total collapse. Ecuador isn't alone. In recent years, abnormally dry weather in places around the globe has sent rivers to extreme lows, draining hydropower resources in places like Norway, Canada, Turkey, even lush Costa Rica. Zambia, highly dependent on hydropower, faces daily power cuts of up to 21 hours this year. 21 hours a day, no power. Parts of China, also reliant on water for energy, suffered lengthy outages, and that started in 2022. As the climate warms and extreme weather events like drought become more common and more severe, many scientists expect hydropower to become a less reliable energy source. Again, the laws of physics state, warming planet, has to rain more overall, has to. 7% more moisture for every degree C of warming. If it's not raining more, there's a factor we're not being told about. That factor is climate engineering operations. In regard to the drought-causing effects of climate engineering and the impacts they're having all over the globe, let me cover for a moment a comment sent to geoengineeringwatch.org from Chris. This is relating to the pending catastrophe of drought in the U.S. Southwest, which I just covered. He stated this: highly unusual winter here in the White Mountains, Pine Top, Arizona. Temperatures 5 to 10 degrees Fahrenheit above normal, consistently with no moisture to speak of. Geoengineering spraying apparent daily now. Complete obscuration of the sky yesterday, trapping in the heat, has happened often this winter. Summer, not so much. Locals can't remember anything like this before. Dryness in the air noted by others. Think barium is a known desiccant and oxygen scavenger. You're correct, Chris. Thank you for submitting that. So many around the globe experiencing exactly the same. Others, like in North Carolina, exact opposite. Deluge, drought deluge scenarios, hallmark of climate engineering operations. As I stated at the beginning of this broadcast, how many representatives from states, how many states are stepping up to push forward legislation that, although symbolic, although it won't stop these winter weather warfare or weather warfare operations in our skies because the Department of Defense considers them national security, because they can, legislation will still put this most dire issue into the full light of day. And once we do that, the fur will fly. Here's the states: Alabama, Arkansas, Florida, Idaho, Iowa, Kentucky, Kansas, Louisiana, Michigan, Mississippi, Missouri, Montana, New Hampshire, Nevada, North Dakota, Ohio, Oklahoma, South Carolina, South Dakota, Texas, West Virginia, Wisconsin, and Wyoming. That's where wheels are turning, and let's hope they continue to turn until each of those states pushes their own legislation into law. Geoengineeringwatch.org is already communicating with a number of these representatives. We will do our best to assist as many of them as we possibly can. My deepest thanks to all of them. In regard to effectively and efficiently making progress in the fight to expose and halt climate engineering, the following letter to Canadian authorities serves as an example of exactly what needs to be done. It was penned by Carl Butler, Quebec, Canada. Hello, Deputy Minister of Climate Change and Environment, Ms. Baker. Global climate modification programs known as solar geoengineering are completely disrupting the global rain cycle, leading to unprecedented and catastrophic drought deluge with Manitoba and Canada. Why is this not being discussed and disclosed by your department? Carl asks. Due to the toxicity of the aerosols, aluminum, barium, strontium nanoparticles being dispersed in our skies from the ongoing climate engineering programs, the environment is being ubiquitously contaminated, leading to unprecedented wildlife and forest die-off. Completely correct, Carl. Thank you. He continues, why is exposing and halting climate engineering fallout not a primary goal of your department? Are you not aware of these operations taking place? If not, please investigate. Make honest and unbiased research on this subject a priority. Time is not on our side if these operations are allowed to continue. He then cites geoengineeringwatch.org. Thank you, Carl. He says most comprehensive website on the subject. He puts a link to the Dimming documentary into this letter and signs sincerely, Carl. And here is the answer Carl got, because he went about this in exactly the right way. Dear Carl Butler, thank you for your email of December 9th, 2024 to the Deputy Minister of Environment and Climate Change expressing your concerns regarding geoengineering and climate modifications. Carl used the science terms. That's why he got a professional response. As Assistant Deputy Minister, I am pleased to respond on the Deputy Minister's behalf. We greatly appreciate you taking the time to share your views on this important issue. The information you have provided, including the resource available at geoengineeringwatch.org, will be reviewed with consideration for the potential impacts of these technologies on our environment and society. Please be assured that your letter will be shared with the relevant officials in the department for further review. The Manitoba government takes public input seriously and works to ensure that the voices of citizens are accounted for when making decisions on climate policy and the environment. Once again, thank you for bringing this issue to our attention. They finish with this. Should you wish to provide additional information, please contact the Climate Action and Energy Innovation Division. Thank you, Carl. Thank you from the bottom of my heart, and thanks to the Canadian Assistant Minister for the courage to actually investigate further. My deepest thanks to each and every individual that is doing their best to do the same. It's our collective efforts that can yet make a difference. This kind of reaching out, of rattling cages, of sounding the alarm by sharing credible data from a credible source can and does yield results sooner or later. It's a team effort. It always has been, and it always will be. Taking a step back, a view of the wider horizon. And so many in the ranks of the human race, past and present, are blinded by greed, driven by the lust for more, for power, for control, or for a sense of belonging to the dominant clan, all harbingers of moral bankruptcy. The Native Americans had a term for this, which I covered in a previous broadcast. It's called Wetiko. Wetiko defined as a psychosis in the true sense of the word, a sickness of the spirit, of the soul. Native American mythologies portray the mythical figure of a Wetiko as a cannibalistic spirit who embodies greed and excess and can possess human beings. Question: what man is truly a man who doesn't make the world better? In regard to the allure of ignorance, it is said, yes, we want to know, but we want also not to know, sometimes fiercely so. How many have actually done any objective investigation of historical conflicts and the conquest of empires that fueled them? History is written by the victor. Never forget that. And thus, the actual truth is lost in time, like tears in rain. Genociding indigenous inhabitants of the land. This has always been the way of the controllers. This holds true to this day, though few have or want a clue, as corporate media pumps out a constant stream of mass distraction, deception, bread, and circus to the masses. Almost none yet seem to have any comprehension of what's unfolding, the totality of the tidal wave of total collapse, environmental and societal, that's looming large over our collective heads. As we begin 2025, Earth's primary life support systems are unraveling by the day, with over 8 billion mouths to feed. This doesn't bode well for our collective futures, or soon-to-be lack of them, if we remain on the current course. Best case scenario on this trajectory: a scattered remnant population somehow surviving with very limited resources on a completely broken and contaminated planet. Again, that's the best case scenario on the current course. But no matter how dark the horizon, what were we born to be? Why are we here? What do we have within ourselves to become, even at this late hour? Our God-given will can't be taken from us. It's been entrusted to each of us as our own. This is our only true possession. Make your voice a messenger of truth, echoing from the rooftops, always, no matter the consequences, regardless of the resistance and rejection you will most certainly face from family and friends, and from the legions of those who still don't want to know. This is the narrow road that far too few have so far summoned the courage to choose. But perhaps by some miracle beyond understanding, many more will soon stand and be heard, as denial will very soon no longer be an option for them. The already awake are desperately needed to sow the seeds of awareness while we still can. And I, for one, believe in miracles, and throughout my life have marveled at them in every single aspect of the miraculous web of life. Trekking in solitude through forests and countless hours over so many years under the surface of the sea, the Channel Islands and the kelp forests, the Sea of Cortez, the Gulf of California, New Zealand, Australia, Fiji, all of it now dying by the day. And I have seen this. I've been so fortunate to have seen the thriving life in these places that was once there. The forest surrounding my Northern California off-grid home is filled with dead and dying fir trees. It was thriving only 20 years ago. The occasional rounds of climate engineering element-seeded rain only accelerates their demise. The silence in the forest is now deafening. Each of us, all of us, are desperately needed in this last hour battle for all that matters, for all that we hold dear. And even if it leads to our physical demise, we're much more than flesh and blood. What life could be better lived? What story could end better than knowing at your very core that you stood unyielding against the fading of the light, that you manned your appointed post until the end? And if enough of us summon this degree of fortitude to stand against the insanity that surrounds us, who can say and who can know how much good we may yet accomplish even at this late hour? Please check the activist suggestions link on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org for specific instructions on how you can help to effectively and efficiently move this fight forward every single day. And every single day counts at this point. Please make your voice heard while you can. You will never, ever regret that. Until next week, this is Dane Wigington with Geoengineeringwatch.org.